What is up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about some older flagship smartphones with the Snapdragon 845 chip, and I want to start off with the LG V40. So this is at a pretty good price right now. It's at around 200 bucks and under, and I'll have all those links down below. This is still a great phone. I did a full video on this phone if you guys want to check that out. This phone does have a premium design. It's glass and metal, IP68 dust and water resistant as well, which is really nice, and I think it still looks good for older flagship phone. One of the highlights with this phone is definitely the 6.4 inch 1440p display or 2K display at 537 for the PPI. It's still really good to look at. Like I said, it's POLED HDR10, and it just gives us some really nice and vibrant colors. Yes, I guess the notch would be a little bit big for today's standards with punch holes and water drops, but still, it's still a very nice looking display. You do have upgradable to Android 10 on the V40 as well, but make sure you get yours not on Sprint. You do have the Snapdragon 845 and the Adreno 630, micro SD support, 64 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM on here. So overall, I found the phone to run pretty smooth. Gaming performance is also still really good on the V40 as well, so you can definitely play the latest games on this phone, no problem. You also have a pretty decently loud speaker and a really good 3.5mm quad DAC headphone jack on here, which is really awesome for anybody who wants to get into high quality audio listening. You also have all of the little stuff like NFC, and you also have a fingerprint scanner rear mounted that works really well. I had no issues with that. The cameras on the V40 have aged pretty well. I would argue that it takes pretty much on par, or if not better, than its counterparts at around this price point of 200 bucks. But you have a triple camera setup, 12 megapixel standard, 12 megapixel telephoto, and a 16 megapixel ultra wide. You have 4K video, and then you have a dual camera setup up front, an 8 megapixel and then a 5 megapixel wide angle lens, and that shoots in 1080p. As you can see from the photos, it takes some pretty good photos, very natural colors, fairly good detail. It's nice that you get a telephoto lens as well, 2x optical zoom. The ultra wide works pretty good. So overall, I was happy with the photos you get. You also have a 3,300 milliamp battery, 18 watt fast charging with wireless charging as well. This phone has pretty okay battery life. It averages around 6 hours of screen on time, which is definitely enough for your average person, but definitely not crazy. Next is the ONEPLUS 6T. I think this phone has aged really well, and you can find it again for 200 bucks, if not cheaper. And this was just an overall very solid phone. I think the highlight with this phone is still Oxygen OS, but the rest of the phone is really good. So you have a glass back, aluminum frame on here. You have an optic AMOLED display, 6.41 inches, 1080p, 402 for the PPI, little wider drop notch. You get fairly slim bezels on here as well, and overall the display looks really nice, very bright, very colorful display here. So the main selling point, like I said, Android 10 is on here, Oxygen OS is on here. It's just really smooth. I love Oxygen OS. It's my favorite skin. It is very smooth, and also you get great customization, but it keeps everything very clean and simple, which is something that I really like. You also have the Snapdragon 845, of course, Adreno 630. This is still, fairly good for gaming. I was playing games just fine on this phone, so you can do that. Unfortunately, there's no SD card support, but you do have 128 gigs of internal storage and 6 gigs of RAM on here. You also have a loudspeaker. I wish this phone has stereo speakers, and there's also no headphone jack, which kind of sucks on here. But you do have NFC on board with a fingerprint scanner under the display. It works very fast, and this phone has actually some pretty good cameras. So I think when the phone first came out, it got a lot of flack, but I think a couple software updates, it takes very good photos, especially at this price point now. You have a 16 megapixel standard and a 20 megapixel lens as well. You also have 4K video, 16 megapixel selfie that shoots in 1080p. As you can see from the photos, the image processing is fine. Colors look fairly good as well. Detail is there. Overall, I didn't have too many problems getting a good shot out of this phone. And like I said, at this price point, I think it does very good. So you do have on here a 3,700 milliamp battery with 20 watt fast charging. For me, this phone lasted all day for me, so it's definitely an all day phone. So I got really good battery life on this phone, so I definitely think it's worth checking out. Next is the Samsung Galaxy Note 9. These phones hover around $300, and this is still an excellent phone for anybody that wants a phone with a built-in stylus. You're still getting a lot of flagship specs with this phone, which is awesome. So you get a premium design, glass and metal, IP68 dust and water resistant, Super AMOLED display, HDR10, 6.4 inches. It's 1440p, 516 for the PPI. Overall, it's a great looking panel, and what's awesome about this Note 9 is that it does not have any type of notch or anything, which is pretty cool. This is upgradable to Android 10, and you also have the Snapdragon 845 and the Adreno 630. Micro SD support, 128 gigs of internal storage, and 6 gigs of RAM. So again, performance and gaming is going to be great on this phone, on all of these phones, matter of fact. You do have on here stereo speakers as well as a headphone jack, which is nice. NFC is on board. You do have an iris scanner on here and the Samsung desktop experience as well. So this phone also has very good cameras from what I've seen, a 12 megapixel standard and a 12 megapixel telephoto, 4K video with an 8 megapixel lens, and then you have that dedicated iris scanner, and the front shoots in 1440p. This phone also has a 4000 milliamp battery with 15 watt charging with wireless charging as well. So the Note 9 is definitely a phone to take a look at if you're somebody that likes to draw on your phone or you just want to navigate with the stylus. Next is the LG G7, one of my favorite phones on this list actually, and you can find this for very cheap, $150 if not cheaper than that. So it's an aluminum frame, glass back on here, IP68 dust and water resistant. It has one of the best feels in the hand for me, and for anybody with smaller hands, it's just a really nice phone to like grip and hold. So I just really love that about this phone. It's got a 6.1 inch display, 1440p, 564 for the PPI. The display is fine. No, it's not an OLED display or anything like that, but colors and everything gets fairly bright as well, so I didn't have any issues. And plus it's a 2K display, so it's extremely sharp looking. You do have Android 10 on here, Snapdragon 845, Adreno 630. This phone does an excellent job at gaming still. I did an updated gaming test, blew me away how it was able to handle Fortnite. And you do have micro SD support, 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. You also have a very loud speaker, one of the best single firing speakers I personally heard on any smartphone. You also have a quad DAC on here. So that is really nice for high quality audio. The fingerprint scanner is on the back. It's physical. It works fine. You also have fairly decent cameras on here. I'm not gonna say great, but I think they're decent. 16 megapixel standard and a 16 megapixel ultra wide, 4K, and then an 8 megapixel selfie. You can see from the shots, you get some pretty good shots on the G7 if you have good lighting. Anything out of good lighting, just like below average lighting or low light, it's not gonna look as good, but in good lighting, you definitely 100% can get a good shot with the G7. So this phone does have a 3000 milliamp battery with 18 watt charging and wireless charging as well. I found the screen on time to be again around 6 hours of screen on time, which I don't think is bad for this size phone. Last phone is the Samsung Galaxy S9. I see these running for around 200 and under 200 on eBay now, so they have dropped the price on here, and it's still a very good phone. You do have a glass back and aluminum frame on here. It's IP68 dust and water resistant. It's basically like the Note 9 we just saw without the stylus, and a little bit smaller. You do have a Super AMOLED display, HDR10, 5.8 inches. So this phone is actually pretty compact for today's standards. So if you want a phone that you can kind of one hand, this would be ideal. It's got a 1440p display, 570 for the PPI, no notch, extremely sharp display, beautiful colors. It's still a very good display. It is upgradable to Android 10. Like I said, Snapdragon 845, Adreno 630. One thing I noticed that even though this phone has really good performance, it does kind of get warmer than the rest of the phones on this list. I don't know if it was just mine, but definitely that was one thing that I noticed. You do get micro SD support, 64 gigs of internal storage and 4 gigs of RAM. You also have stereo speakers, which sound great, so I was happy with that. A headphone jack as well as NFC is on board. Your iris scanner is on board. The one thing that I think didn't age well is Samsung only put one lens on this phone. So it's got a 12 megapixel standard and 4K video, and then an 8 megapixel selfie camera that shoots in 1440p. The one lens on here does a good job at taking photos. It's just that there's no ultra wide or telephoto or anything like that. So I think that's where this phone kind of shows its age. But if you're okay with just, having just one good camera, because it is actually a good camera, it takes pretty good photos for today. So I think the camera was perfectly fine. But again, just do note that's just one camera. So you do have a 3000 milliamp battery with 15-watt charging, wireless charging on board. To me, this wasn't an all-day phone, but battery life is just decent on here. But overall, the Galaxy S9, for the price that you're paying, it's really cheap and still a very good older flagship phone. So that pretty much wraps this video up. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.